If Lady Jane Grey has too often been reduced to a chess piece, then Mary Tudor has been flattened into a very two-dimensional caricature. She's remembered as obstinate, unforgiving, Bloody Mary, a religious zealot, a woman driven by dogma rather than courage. But if we look closely at the events of 1553, and especially at Mary's own actions during the succession crisis, a very different woman emerges. This was not a passive heir waiting to be rescued by loyal men. This was a woman who knew she was in danger, who understood the risks she faced, and who nonetheless chose to fight. A tough cookie. And Mary's toughness had been forged long before July 1553. For years, decades even, she'd lived under relentless pressure. Under her brother's reign, her faith was criminalised, her household was dismantled, her servants were imprisoned, she was repeatedly ordered to abandon the Mass, and she refused openly, repeatedly, and at great personal risk. At one point, she declared that she would lay her head on a block rather than comply. That was not the language of a weak woman. But the roots of that defiance went back much further, to her father's reign. Under Henry VIII, Mary had experienced sustained emotional and psychological punishment. She'd been declared illegitimate, cut off from her mother, stripped of her status, and forced into humiliating service in the household of her infant half-sister. She'd been pressurised to acknowledge her parents' marriage as unlawful and to accept her own illegitimacy. Demands she resisted for as long as she possibly could. By 1536, the situation had become so dangerous that Mary's staunchest supporter, the imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis, feared for her life. After all, a member of her father's own council had threatened her to her face, saying that were she his or any other man's daughter, he would beat her to death or strike her head against the wall until he made it as soft as a boiled apple, and calling her a traitress who would be punished as such. Chapuis believed that Mary risked execution if she continued to defy her father, and it was for this reason that he urged her against her conscience to submit. And Mary did submit, but it came at a terrible personal cost. She felt she'd betrayed her mother and everything she believed in. It affected both her physical and mental health, and it taught her how close defiance could bring her to death. It taught her how precarious her position truly was, and it taught her that survival sometimes required endurance as much as resistance. So when Mary found herself once again under threat in 1553, she didn't hesitate. She recognised the danger instantly. She understood exactly what could happen if she allowed herself to be taken into custody. And this time, instead of submission, she chose to fight. When she received word in early July 1553 that her brother was dying and that there was an aristocratic plot against her, Mary didn't panic. She acted. She understood exactly what was at stake. If she allowed herself to be taken into custody, she would lose everything: her claim, her freedom, and possibly her life. And so she fled, calmly, deliberately, under cover of a plausible excuse, and headed east, where she knew she could rally support. According to Robert Wingfield, whose Vita Mariae gives us a rare window into Mary's own side of events, she escaped what he called the jaws of her enemies, placing her trust not in chance but in God, and in her hereditary right. When Mary reached Kenninghall and finally received confirmation of Edward's death, she made her decision. She would claim the throne. Wingfield is very clear about the scale of what she was attempting. He writes that Mary's decision should have been seen as Herculean rather than womanly daring, because she was taking on a powerful, organised enemy with money, weapons and troops, while she herself was at that moment militarily unprepared and outnumbered. Mary knew this, and she did it anyway. At Kenninghall, she gathered her household and declared that the crown had descended to her by divine and by human law. She didn't ask whether they would support her. She stated her right, and they declared her queen. From that moment on, Mary behaved like a queen. She issued orders, she wrote letters, she summoned nobles. She moved strategically to Framlingham Castle, a defensible stronghold. She authorised musters, organised supplies, and relied on experienced men to turn local enthusiasm into disciplined military force. Wingfield records how men flocked to her from across East Anglia, offering not just loyalty, but their lives. He describes how an untrained crowd was transformed into an army, obedient to orders and eager to meet the enemy. And as I explained in my talk on the succession crisis, Mary did not remain distant from this effort. She visited her troops. She spoke to them directly. Wingfield describes her as their gentle and beloved mistress, noting that the soldiers showed her such reverence that he doubted they would have shown greater devotion if God himself had appeared before them. And what's striking here is not just their loyalty, but Mary's leadership. While Queen Jane was trying valiantly to hold power in London, Mary was building it in the countryside. While Jane was failing to inspire loyalty in London, Mary was inspiring extraordinary devotion among her men in East Anglia. Perhaps Mary was channeling her maternal grandmother, the warrior Queen Isabella of Castile, for Mary was clearly willing to fight for her throne. Wingfield makes a point of this. He stresses that Mary was not spared bloodshed by chance or by timidity, but because her enemies collapsed before a battle could be fought. The crisis ended not because Mary shrank from conflict, but because her cause proved overwhelming. And when Mary entered London in August 1553, she did so not as a frightened survivor, but as a victorious ruler, England's legitimate and only queen. Wingfield tells us that nothing mattered more to Mary once victory was secured than thanksgiving, acknowledging God as the author of her success and restoring unity to a divided realm. This too speaks to her toughness. Mary had endured years of humiliation, fear and danger. She'd stood alone against the governments of her father and brother. She'd been prepared to die for her faith. She'd risked war to claim her throne. And yet when she won, her first instinct wasn't revenge, but order, prayer and reconciliation. Like Jane, Mary was unwavering. Like Jane, she was prepared to die rather than abandon what she believed to be right. And like Jane, she was far tougher than history has often allowed. The tragedy of 1553 is not that one woman was strong and the other wasn't. It is that both were, but only one could win. Lady Jane Grey faced death with extraordinary courage, and Mary faced power with extraordinary resolve. Two tough cookies, two unyielding consciences, and a succession crisis shaped not by weakness, but by conviction. Whatever their faults, and I cannot and will not even try to condone Mary's persecution of Protestants, although I'm pretty sure Jane would have done the same to Catholics, these two women deserve to be remembered and admired for their courage. They had shed loads of it. And if you want to know more about them, I'd highly recommend Leander de Lisle's book on the Grey sisters, the sisters who would be queen, and Linda Porter's biography of Mary.